In 1970, at the height of the Cold War, Soviet scientists embarked on one of the strangest projects of the 20th century. Hidden deep within the Arctic Circle, on the Kola Peninsula, they began drilling. Their goal was simple to state, but nearly impossible to achieve: dig deeper into the Earth's crust than anyone ever had before. The project was known as the Kola Super Deep Borehole. Over the course of nearly 2 decades, teams of engineers and scientists battled extreme heat, crushing pressure, and mechanical failures to push their drill further into the planet. By 1989, they had reached a depth of 40,230 feet, over 12 kilometers straight down. To this day, it remains the deepest hole mankind has ever dug into solid rock. On paper, it was a scientific triumph. The U.S. had previously held the record with its Bertha Rogers hole in Oklahoma, but the Soviets crushed it. The borehole wasn't just a matter of bragging rights. It promised answers to some of geology's greatest mysteries, insights into the Earth's crust, its ancient rocks, and the very history of our planet. But as the drill bit chewed its way deeper, something began to change. At first, it was the expected anomalies: temperatures far higher than predicted. Rocks from the Archean age, more than 2.5 billion years old, shattered and hauled to the surface. Cavities filled with boiling mud that hissed with trapped hydrogen gas. And then there were the sounds. The drilling team reported hearing strange acoustic anomalies deep in the borehole. Officially, they were described as the cracking and shifting of rock under immense pressure, but the unofficial stories, whispered between workers, were far stranger. Stories of noises that sounded less like rocks breaking and more like voices. The descent into mystery. By the mid-1980s, the borehole had already earned its reputation as the strangest scientific site in the Soviet Union. Instruments malfunctioned constantly. Drill bits snapped in unexpected ways. Temperatures rose so sharply that engineers struggled to design tools that could survive the descent. But the physical challenges weren't the only concern. One geophysicist, speaking years later, claimed that the team sometimes picked up inexplicable spikes in their seismic readings. Waves of energy that pulsed from the depths, unlike any natural pattern. Others insisted the drilling rigs seemed to vibrate in rhythm, as if responding to something below. The deeper they went, the stranger the samples became. Rock cores pulled from 7 kilometers down revealed microscopic fossils, tiny remains of organisms thought impossible at such depths and pressures. By 9 kilometers, the drill pierced cavities filled with water trapped miles beneath the earth for billions of years. But at 12 kilometers, the discoveries stopped being merely strange. Technicians monitoring borehole acoustics began reporting sounds that defied explanation. When the drill paused, they heard faint tones rising from the depths, tones that seemed layered, almost patterned. Some likened it to wind rushing through caverns. Others swore it sounded like a distant wail. When an early recording circulated through the team, some laughed nervously. Others refused to listen a second time. Rumors spread quickly that the Soviets had drilled too deep, that they had uncovered something buried for eons, and for a brief moment those rumors escaped the Kola Peninsula and spread across the world. The hole to hell. In 1989, Western newspapers began to pick up a strange story. It was called The Well to Hell. The legend claimed that Soviet scientists had lowered a microphone into the borehole, curious to hear the sounds of the Earth itself. What they recorded, the story said, wasn't geological noise. It was something else. The recording was described as thousands of human voices crying out in agony, a chorus of suffering rising from nearly 8 miles beneath the Earth's surface. The tabloids called it proof that the Soviets had drilled into hell itself. Religious figures seized on the story, claiming it was evidence of divine punishment. Of course, the scientific community dismissed it outright. They called it a hoax, a fabrication spread during the waning years of the Cold War, and officially, that's all it ever was. But those who worked at the site tell a more complicated story. One engineer, who later emigrated to Finland, described the night the tape was played. He claimed the room fell silent. Some laughed nervously, others crossed themselves. The recording was quickly locked away, dismissed as interference, feedback, or outright fabrication. Yet he insisted it was real. He claimed he could still hear it, decades later, whenever he closed his eyes. Whether the tape was authentic or not hardly matters, because by 1989, the project was collapsing under its own weight. The drill could go no deeper. Temperatures reached nearly 200 degrees Celsius. Tools melted, machinery broke down. Funding ran dry. In 1992, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the project was abandoned entirely. The site was shuttered, equipment was left to rust, the borehole was welded shut. The official explanation was simple: the scientific value no longer justified the cost. But others claim there was another reason: the forbidden data. In the years after the Kola borehole was closed, fragments of internal documents leaked. They spoke of anomalous heat signatures, of acoustic distortions inconsistent with geology. Some reports suggested that certain scientists who worked on the deepest phases of the project later disappeared from public record entirely. Eyewitnesses recall that during the final days of drilling, guards were posted around the site. Entire sections of data were classified and removed by Soviet officials. One rumor claims that before the borehole was sealed, an inspection team was sent down into the upper shaft. When they reached the lowest accessible chamber, they reported hearing something moving below, something vast. Officially, no such expedition ever took place, but the site's sudden and permanent closure raises questions. If the borehole was merely a failed experiment, why weld it shut? Why guard it? Why erase names from records? Even stranger nearby towns began reporting odd phenomena in the early 1990s. Unexplained tremors, strange lights flickering in the night sky. Locals whispered that the earth itself seemed restless around the abandoned site, and yet, for decades, almost no one was allowed near it. The darker timeline. Imagine for a moment that the legends are true, that when Soviet scientists pierced the crust of the earth, they didn't just reach rock, water, or hydrogen gas. They reached something older, something buried. The temperature spikes, the strange fossils, the inexplicable sounds, all pieces of a larger puzzle. What if they weren't hearing rocks shift? What if they weren't hearing feedback or interference? What if they were hearing voices? One account, never verified, claimed that a researcher on site suffered a breakdown after reviewing seismic recordings. He insisted he had heard his mother's voice calling to him from the depths, though she had died years before. Others reported shadows moving in the shafts, flickers of heat that cast no light, and perhaps the most disturbing, a rumor that one of the final core samples contained something impossible, not just fossils, not just rock, but a fragment of something biological, something that twitched when exposed to air. Officially, none of this exists. The borehole was a scientific effort, abandoned for lack of progress. But if the darker version is true, then maybe the Soviets didn't stop because they couldn't drill further. Maybe they stopped because they did, and maybe they were afraid of what would happen if they went any deeper. Today, the Kola super deep borehole is little more than a relic. The site is abandoned, the shaft welded shut, the equipment left to rot in the Arctic wind. Officially, it is nothing more than a failed Cold War science project, but legends endure. They call it the hole to hell. Visitors who've approached the site in recent years describe an eerie silence. Some claim to feel vibrations in the ground, subtle but constant. Others say that if you place your ear against the steel seal, you can hear something faint. Not the wind, not the earth, something else, something that waits. The truth may never be known. Perhaps the borehole was nothing more than an ambitious, doomed attempt to reach the depths of our planet. Or perhaps it was something else, a warning, a scar. We dug deeper than ever before, and maybe, just maybe, we dug too deep.